the chair. And she's been the president of the Texas Eagle Forum. And she's just a 35 years of just patronage and servanthood to the patriots of Texas. So please welcome Cathie Adams. Thank you, Cathie.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight. And it's wonderful to see many of you again. And first of all, congratulations to the victors back there on that back row. And I just so appreciate you putting not just your names on the line, but your necks on the line. Because it's absolutely true. When you enter public service, it is 24/7. And so thank you for your commitment. And I've already heard wonderful things about the two newly elected. And so proud of you for what you were doing and have already done. So again, thank you. It is a privilege to serve people, and I have enjoyed doing that for the past more than 30 years. But what is really a surprise to my life was when a friend called me and asked me to go to Beijing, China back in 1995, and I thought that she had lost her mind. And then I thought, well, what else do I have to do? I asked my husband, and he immediately said yes. And I thought, oh, no. So then I met a man by the name of Henry Lamb who told me that I needed to go to Kyoto, Japan in 1997 and to learn about the climate change issue. And I told him probably I knew nothing about it. He said, you will learn, because it really was going to be that important to this country. And truly it has been. And so most every year I go to one meeting that the United Nations hosts concerning climate change. It is so important to Texas because that is our #1 industry. And it's also important because of the global plan. I want you to understand where it began and then the progress that they are making, because I'm telling you that these people are relentless. They never give up. They never, 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 never give up. So it's up to us. Are we going to give up and just let them have their way because we're tired of fighting them, or are we going to stay the course and are we going to finish the race? And I hope that you will join us in finishing the race. This meeting last December was in a place called Paris, France. I mean, they've had meetings in such places as Bali and other lovely places like Durban, South Africa, and so on. And so you will see a little bit about that. But to go to Paris, France, okay, that sounds like it might be entertaining. Well, it's certainly entertaining when you're there with 20,000 other people in the press and another 20,000 people who attend these meetings who are activists, as we are seeing going on in Dallas. Trust me, they attend these UN meetings as activists there as well. This was the logo of that meeting in Paris, France, and as you can see, their message is very positive, right? We're going to hang the polar bears out to dry. The earth is so parched, the ships are all now sitting on dry land, and the people and the families are absolutely famished. So what a positive message, right? This is their message. We have a whole lot more good news than what they do. But that was their annual meeting, that was their annual logo, and because it is Obama's final year to play in this arena, they wanted to make sure that he had a big victory to bring home. So let's see what he did. Well, first of all, let's look at the history of this UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's huge. You need to understand that our Secretary of State, John Kerry, has been to most every one of the meetings since 1992, when the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was created in Rio de Janeiro. So it's very big for John Kerry. It's very big for Barack Obama. But we got into it so that there's no one whose hands are totally clean with a Republican president, George H.W. Bush, who was warned against going to Rio de Janeiro, but he went anyway. And he went to sign two documents. Now, it's almost unheard of that the United Nations would create a new treaty. It's almost unheard of that they would create a new treaty. But in this case, in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, they created 3 treaties, 3 international treaties. Plus, they established a blueprint to implement those 3 treaties, and that blueprint is called Agenda 21. Of the 3 treaties and the soft law document called Agenda 21, George H.W. Bush went to Rio de Janeiro to sign 2. First of all, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. He understood exactly what he was doing, folks. He knew exactly what he was doing. And you will understand a whole lot more about it at the end of this talk, I do hope. And also Agenda 21. Why would he single it out? It wasn't a treaty. Why did he go to sign it? Because it was the blueprint to implement all 3 of those treaties that were created in 1992. So then, he brought it back from Rio, rammed it through the United States Senate, and it was ratified. So the United States is part and parcel of the Climate Change Treaty that was created in 1992, ratified in 1992, and then, of course, President Bush loses that election. Who comes in the next January and issues an executive order other than the first President Clinton. And God help us if we get them. So he then creates this executive order called the President's Council on Sustainable Development to implement Agenda 21. And I've already said more than once that Agenda 21 is what? The blueprint to implement all 3 of the treaties that were created in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. This is a big deal. So through bureaucracies, federal bureaucracies, any local, state government that goes to the federal government for a grant is going to have to jump through every hoop where Agenda 21 is implementing these treaties. That's how we are part and parcel of what is going on. What is sustainable development in a nutshell? You are seeing and hearing so much right now from Black Lives Matter and even the president today, as he spoke in Dallas, talking about this issue, social, environmental, and economic equity or justice. You listen to Hillary Clinton and her new best friend, Bernie Sanders. And what are they talking about? They are talking about social justice. They're talking about environmental justice. They are talking about economic justice. It's the same as using the word equality. Now, back in the day, those of us who grew up with real educations understood that this was Marxism, to call for absolute equity. It's utopian. It never has and never will happen. And yet our kids today are at universities or what? Why were they voting for Bernie Sanders? Because he's calling for this, equity. We're going to give you everything free. And they don't understand nothing comes free. But that's what our education system has done. So, it's like a watermelon. It's green on the outside, it's the green agenda, but it's actually Marxism being implemented through the green agenda. That's what this is all about. Another way of saying it in Republican terms is New World Order. The theory behind this whole climate change agenda and sustainable development is that carbon dioxide emitted when you and I breathe out, the same gas that is emitted when fossil fuels are burned, are causing the climate to change, which is a bald-faced lie. Everybody knows it's a lie, except for radicals who, if they want to get money for their studies and their universities, have got to buy into the agenda. And so therefore they teach the kids the same thing. My son's an Aggie, so I will be very fair and free in talking about one meeting I attended in Bonn, Germany, where there were 2 Aggies, and they were all excited about going to Bonn, Germany. They had no idea the rest of the story until they got there. They began to study under a man by the name of Fred Singer, and if you want to look him up, you'll find that he's a renowned scientist. And they began studying under him and learning from him and saying, oh my goodness, even at Texas A&M, they're lying to us about climate change. So, carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. It is not a pollutant. As a matter of fact, look at photosynthesis, something that we learned in elementary school. Plants take in carbon dioxide and emit what? Oxygen. So the more that plants take in carbon dioxide, the more they grow, and the more they emit oxygen. I think God has things firmly under control. In this picture, you can see that as they increase the amount of carbon dioxide on this tree, look what happens. The tree grows bigger. In our greenhouses, that's what they increase is carbon dioxide in order to make the plants grow bigger. And it's not a bad thing. And then if you look at the Earth's atmosphere, you will see that it is made up of roughly 78% of nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 1% argon, and 0.038 only of carbon dioxide. So look at what we're talking about, a tiny, tiny minutia gas in our atmosphere, and we're freaking out about it and saying that by burning fossil fuels that we are going to destroy the planet because we are going to cause such catastrophic climate change. Let me tell you a secret. The climate is changed primarily by 3 different factors that man has no control over. The first is winds, and I don't care how many windmills I saw coming out here. I saw some of them going around, and I saw some of them standing still. And you're going to see more about windmills and their profitability as we go along. But why are most of them standing still if they're not just being built and not in action yet? Well, because the wind isn't blowing. As a matter of fact, you know what the Germans have just found out? They had so much of their energy coming from windmills that it's destroying their electric grid. And so they're going to back off on the amount of wind energy that they're producing in order to protect their grid and rebuild their electric grid that has nearly been destroyed because of windmills. Why? Because sometimes the wind blows and sometimes it doesn't. So that erratic behavior is not as good for that grid as is a steady amount of energy produced by natural means like natural gas, or even coal-fired plants, or even water going over a dam. But why is this such a big deal? Because if you can control the gas that people breathe out, and that you can control the gas that everywhere, all the time, people on Earth can be controlled. You can control energy. You can control people everywhere, all the time, around the globe. So that's why this is a big deal to the United Nations. And anyone who wants a new world order, anyone who wants a Marxist agenda, anyone who wants social, environmental, and economic equity wants to control carbon dioxide. And the ultimate goal is to even tax it. To tax it. So that they can collect trillions, and we'll get into that too in a little bit. So, back in 1992, the Climate Change Treaty is created, and then it enters into force in 1994, and you have to have enough nations who buy into it before it goes into force. And so that's why there were a couple of years there. Now there are 196 parties. You see, the United Nations also uses very Marxist terminology. They don't call us sovereign nations. They call us states because they see themselves as the overreaching authority for the whole globe. And you'll see more about that too. So in 1997, when I got involved in this issue, it was 3 years. And what the Kyoto Protocol did, first of all, it was going down the tubes until Al Gore flew to Kyoto and told the American delegation to be flexible. And we're all scratching our heads like, what does that mean? Well, what it meant was to cave in and to give the United Nations what they wanted. And that was to commit that we would reduce our carbon emissions, our carbon dioxide emissions, by 5% below 1990 levels by 2008 to 2012. Now, if you also do the math, that critter was thinking that he would be elected after Bill Clinton and that he would be out of office before this was ever due. So he believes in what he's talking about so strongly. But because he's selling carbon credits. So then in 2007, the United Nations goes to Bali, and I want you to see some of the language they use, because one meeting builds on another, builds on another, builds on another. This is the way that they work. They talked about mandating a focus on finance and technology. Well, what that means in UN speak is that they are going to focus on finance because somehow they've got to start raising some money to redistribute wealth. You see, at first in Kyoto, Japan, even the poor countries were saying, this is nonsense. We're not going there. Today, they go to UN meetings. Not only every day do they stand at a window and get a stipend from your tax dollars in order to pay their way at that meeting, but they know, as I heard one man from Colombia who was American trained say that, you know, emeralds are our #1 industry, but if this treaty goes into effect, we're going to make more money off of carbon trading than we will off of our #1 industry. That's what this is all about, redistributing wealth around the globe. So then in 2009, Copenhagen, that was right after Obama, before even going into office, had won that Nobel Prize, remember? So he thought all he had to do was walk on the scene and the waters were going to recede and the glaciers were going to not melt anymore and all kinds of supernatural things were going to happen because this man believes that he is supernatural. We need to pray that he knows this, the one who is supernatural. So he said in Copenhagen, we have charted our course, we have made our commitments, and we will do what we say. But the world was disappointed that he didn't deliver more. In other words, Copenhagen was a bust to his radical agenda. After that, in 2010, we went to Cancun. At that point, actually in Copenhagen, it was discussed, and in Cancun, it was promised by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton that we would start what was called a Green Climate Fund. That was the finance that they talked about in a prior meeting. You see, they talked about finance, they put a target on finance, and then we go to Copenhagen, they say, yeah, we need a Green Climate Fund, and then the next year Hillary Clinton says, yeah, it needs to be $100 billion a year, $100 billion with a B dollars a year for redistributing around the globe. And then we went to Durban, and they decided, yeah, and we need a treaty that is going to be applicable to all parties. Now, applicable to all parties in UN speak does not mean that South Africa and the United States would be paying the same amount of tax if they create a tax on carbon. No, it's not like that at all. But that is jargon they use, which throws people off and the media eats up, and you know how they love to spin. And then we go to Doha, and there, the European Union, for example, decided that they knew that the Kyoto Protocol, even though the United States was never part of the Kyoto Protocol, it sunset in 2012, so the European Union decided they will voluntarily keep it going. Is there any reason for Brexit that you see here? This is another thing that's killing them. It's killing their industries. They're having to ship all of their industries somewhere else because they cannot grow their industries, because that would mean the need for burning fossil fuels. The Green Climate Fund, to tell you a bit more about it, is $100 billion a year in climate financing from rich to poor countries. So the Kyoto Protocol wanted to do that by taxing only 37 out of 196 nations. 37 out of 196. That was Kyoto's idea. So Kyoto's gone away, and so then they come in with this new idea. And then, at the Paris meeting just last December, they're saying, yeah, that $100 billion, that really is not going to be enough. By 2025, we're going to have a higher number than $100 billion a year. Well, let me tell you, since this thing was created in 2010, officially, they have not collected their first $100 billion yet. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is very simple. They want a tax on something. The United Nations cannot tax. They have no authority to tax. They are not a sovereign nation. But sovereign nations can lay down their sovereignty and give them what they want. We've got to have strong leadership in this nation to keep us out of any more of these entanglements. Then we went to Warsaw in 2013, and there they created something brand new called Intended Nationally Determined Contributions, in other words, INDCs. These are nations actually setting their own caps for their own emissions so that then they can commit that to the United Nations. Now, who is the UN that we need to be committing anything? Aren't we a sovereign nation that can take care of our own carbon emissions? Isn't our air cleaner than it is in Beijing, China? You've seen the pictures. So why would China be scot-free from all these ideas and America's bound to them? In Lima, Peru, they decided that those INDCs, those nations that are stupid enough to set their own limits on their carbon emissions, would have a process of submitting and reviewing those caps to the Secretariat. Again, another Marxist terminology. So please be very careful of this. So, if you can measure carbon emissions, and then you have to submit them to the Secretariat, then isn't the next step going to be easy? For the UN to say, we can set a tax based upon the INDCs that nations submit to the Secretariat. And if they go under them, they go over them, then we assess what they owe the United Nations. So, in Paris, they claimed that it was a historic climate agreement. Now, there is really nothing to put a finger on and say that they walked away with some historic agreement, other than that it was Obama's final UN Framework Convention on Climate Change meeting. And he wanted to walk out, he and John Kerry, saying that they had calmed the seas. That's it. That was all of it. So, what the Climate Action Network then said, which is a coalition of these leftist groups that are paid by your tax dollars, by the United Nations, and by our dues to the UN. And I mean, the amount that the Americans give to the United Nations is impossible to know. Many say that, well, we give 22%, 23% of their entire budget, but there are so many other pots of gold that we dump money into that it's impossible to track all of them and know exactly what we give to the United Nations. But this Climate Action Network, more paid volunteers, and as a real volunteer, paid by my husband for 30 years, plus it's just amazing that these people can be paid to do this nonsense. But they travel the globe and do whatever George Soros and company want them to do. And what they claim is that they're going to overcome both climate change and poverty with this plan that came out of Paris. So you can see the connection right there. It is social, economic, and environmental justice. And justice can be interchanged with the word equity. So that's what they're after. And then you see another man making a comment that carbon emissions will have to peak well before 2030 and should be eliminated soon after 2050. How in the world are we going to eliminate carbon emissions? And why would we want to? I mean, we don't want grass to grow. We don't want trees to grow. We don't want food to eat. My goodness, why would we want to eliminate carbon emissions? And of course, they're talking about burning of fossil fuels, but that doesn't make any sense. They also talk about eliminating people, and they've been talking about that, of course, since the 1960s and 70s. When they use words, just like typical Marxists do, they will use a word that we think we understand what it means, but they change the meaning of the word. For example, here's ratchet mechanism, where countries will regroup to assess and potentially adjust their national commitments. It's a global stock take, where a ratchet to you and I might mean something totally different. Countries reevaluate their commitments. It's a way of ratcheting up our commitment to the United Nations, submitting more of our national sovereignty to the United Nations through this one treaty. Transparency and compliance. Again, just like any tax that would ever be imposed, it would never be equally imposed around the world. America is always going to get a heavier burden. And they call sunshine requiring all countries to report their mitigation. And that, again, what's good for the goose should be good for the gander, but it's not. We know how to measure. When we see the rule of law as Americans, we believe it means something, and we respond to that. But that is not true around the world. Many of them will sign on the dotted line, get out, walk away from the signature, and forget it. It means nothing to them. But good practice methodologies are to be accepted by the International Panel on Climate Change, and you will see more about them in just a moment. Before this meeting ever happened in December, Obama, the August before that meeting, delivered. And he delivered through what he calls his Clean Power Plan. And it mandates 32% reduction by the year 2030 of CO2 pollution. You see how he picks up the lingo? CO2 is not a pollutant, but that is the word that he uses. And it mandates oil and natural gas companies to mitigate 45% of methane emissions. Of course, by 2025, they're also coming after our cows. And I think the cattlemen in Texas ought to stand up and say, not on my watch, you're not doing that. But what one oilman said, as you see here, is there is no question that President Barack H. Obama wants to eliminate the use of all fossil fuels. That's what he's after. That's what he's after. And of course, he will still have Air Force One. He will still have all the Secret Service agents. He and Al Gore will continue to have their entourages and their motorcades. And it's just those little people like us that they want to take all of those goodies away from. And furthermore, after doing a Clean Power Plan, and you're going to see more about that in a second, Obama boasted that the next president will be found politically unable to undo the myriad of EPA rules by fiat. Why? If he imposed them by fiat, why can't we undo them? Or the next president undo them by fiat? But this is how this man thinks. He thinks he is truly the emperor. Back in 2008, we remember what Barack said. If someone wants to build a new coal-fired power plant, they can, but it will bankrupt them because they will be charged a huge sum for all the greenhouse gas that's being emitted. What is he calling for here? A carbon tax. How many people got it? How many Texans who voted for Barack Hussein Obama got what he was doing? But I will tell you this, I was campaigning for Mitt Romney in the state of Ohio, and the night before the election, when Romney was making his final stop in Ohio, and getting on his private plane and heading back to Massachusetts, there were people in the line and in the rally where I was wearing hats that said coal equals jobs. Did Mitt Romney ever say a word about coal equals jobs? He ran away from everything. And then we wonder why, as Republicans, we're sitting there twiddling our thumbs, losing elections. If we're not going to confront wrong and cite these kind of issues, then why are we even involved in this? If we'll stand for nothing, we'll fall for anything. Amen. So there we are. That's what is going on. The 24 states that filed suit against Obama's Clean Power Plan at least have a stay right now from the courts. They have a stay. We haven't won anything, but at least we have a stay. The Clean Power Plan has strong scientific and legal foundations, according to the EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy, which of course is just all malarkey. And she wants to put it under the Clean Air Act, and that just doesn't hold water. Not legally, not logically, not anything. And so, what would it cost us, according to the Hill last October, if we eliminate coal-fired plants? 125,000 jobs and $650 billion it would cost us. And so how much does the coal industry contribute? $65.7 billion to the national GDP. So what do jobs mean to this man? What does the economy mean to this man? He's totally clueless on all fronts. So it's working what he's doing. Since he took office in 2009, many of the coal companies have plummeted more than 90%. Here was one company, Cleveland-Cliffs, that offered to buy Alpha at $128 a share back in 2008, $4 sold, but the deal collapsed. Today, Alpha shares are worth 4 cents, and I believe they've gone bankrupt. So this is the effect of Obama. And folks, you may think that we're only oil and gas in the state of Texas. We get a lot of coal fields too. A lot. It is a big industry in the state of Texas. Soros profits from all of this. In 2009, Al Gore went to visit with him, and he pledged $1 billion to renewable energy. Of course, this man's mind only thinks, I think, evil, and also, how can I profit from this? So let's look and just see what Soros is doing and saying. He said there's no magic bullet for climate change, but there is a lethal bullet, coal. So at that point, he began buying billions of dollars, millions of shares from major coal companies. And as a result, the coal companies lost 98% of their values. Who's the man who nearly single-handedly destroyed the British economy and the pound? Same guy. How did he do it? Same way, right? This guy is no secret. And he is a significant donor, of course, to Hillary Clinton and to Obama. And Hillary Clinton supports Obama's Clean Power Plan. So if she's elected, guess what? She's going to be pushing this the same way Obama has. And according to Citibank, the total value of listed coal companies has shrunk 2/3 since 2012 with no improvement in sight. So here's what one man, Sterling Burnett, from the Heartland Institute says about what George Soros is doing. He spent millions of dollars in multiple years helping drive down the price of coal. And so he could be doing that in order to keep coal in the ground, in order to help the environment, if you truly believed that burning coal was doing damage to the environment and therefore the climate. But his suspicion is that he helped to drive the stocks down, bought as many shares as he can, and when the stocks rebound, he can sell his shares and make a huge profit. What in the world is going to happen in order to cause this stock rebound? Are people finally going to say enough, as the people in England did concerning Brexit? I mean, what is it going to take? Are we going to have to be robbed of our most dependable sources of energy? Because not only I've already explained enough about solar and wind, but let's look at these numbers. In the United States, coal is the source of 39% of our energy, natural gas 27%, nuclear 19%. And then you can see the other ones. But look at solar, 0.4%, and wind is 4.4%. But then you've already heard what the Germans are doing concerning wind. Why? Because it's destroying the grid. Texas is the only state in the nation who has our own electric grid. We don't want it destroyed. Buffett also says about wind, we get a tax credit if we build a lot of wind farms. That's the only reason to build them. They don't make any sense without the tax credit. So what does that make them? Welfare dependents. They're building wind farms and you are subsidizing them, so they are absolutely welfare dependent upon taxpayers.
That's right.
But this is Obama's military as well. He's implementing all of these crazy theories and ideas and trying to destroy our military in every way he can. He also says that those who deny his theory will be pretty lonely because you'll be debating our military, most of America's business leaders, the majority of the American people, almost the entire scientific community, and 200 nations around the world. who agree it's a problem and intend to solve it. That's what he said in the State of the Union address concerning climate change and this entire agenda. So he thinks that he's brainwashed enough people that there is not going to be the ability to push back, because even the military is going to be on the wrong side of the issue. It's interesting, he says, Obama says that climate change is even the cause of wars. But Mark Moreno, one of the men I work with at these UN meetings, who's got a tremendous sense of humor, did some research on it, and he found that warmer eras have meant fewer wars. So during the ice ages, there were more wars than during warm eras. I guess people got busy doing things like farming and growing their livestock. Peer-reviewed studies also show that the primary causes of civil war are political, not environmental. Gee golly whiz, who would have thought? But to tell you that Ban Ki-moon, who leaves office at the end of this year, and someone who replaces him will be just as radical in his thinking, for sure, on this issue, because this is the #1 issue at the United Nations. The #1 issue. And to tell you how strongly he feels about it, he said that the Paris Climate Accord is a health insurance policy for the planet. Really? Do you know that this man actually is a Buddhist? And do you know that Buddhists think that grass has a soul? Trees have souls? Animals? I mean, folks, we are not talking about a Judeo-Christian way of thinking. We are not talking about that as being the very foundation of Western civilization. We are talking about our civilization being attacked through this craziness. He also says that it is the most important thing for humanity, this negotiation. To give you a bit of background, I promised, on the IPCC, I want you to see how the UN creates its own scientific, which are really not scientific entities, in order to promote its own political agenda. And that's all they are, is political. Yes, they will have some scientists mixed in who are bought and paid for, but they are not pumping out science. They are not even doing research. The UN does no research. All they do is take research and spin it for their own agenda. And that is a fact. But the World Meteorological Association has 191 members, and in 2015, the global average surface temperature, according to WMO, is likely to be the world's stone record. It's not. It's not. As a matter of fact, since 1998, we've had no global warming. The Earth is not warm, and you're going to see that again in this presentation. Its mission, it thinks, is because, well, climate changes, but it doesn't care that there's a boundary here, a national boundary, and so that means we need a global entity, and so the UN has a WMO, and doesn't that just suit their purposes quite well? They don't have to worry that there is a border between England and France, or the US and Canada, or that a race one between the US and Mexico. So, this is what the WMO mission is. Well, the WMO then gets together with the UN Environment Program and creates its own Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. That is who we are supposed to trust as being the authority of whether or not what we submit in our INDCs. Remember those caps that we have to submit to the UN, to the Secretariat at the UN? It has to be something that is approved by the IPCC. You see this incestuous relationship? The IPCC was created by the WMO and the UNEP in order to, again, advance its political agenda on climate change. And you also remember that when Al Gore won the Peace Prize in 2007, he won half of it. The other half of it was won by none other than the IPCC. Isn't this just interesting how what goes around comes around with the UN? A carbon footprint. This is where Al Gore is making so much money. And that is that whenever we travel to these meetings, then we get these notices on email saying you must offset your your carbon footprint. So they give you this little scale, and this is how far you traveled, and so therefore this is how many carbon emissions that you were responsible for. And you send us money, and then we will plant trees or do whatever to offset. Now, does anybody ever see one of those trees planted later? I mean, really, do we need bridges built in deserts? This is nuts. But this is what Al Gore is making billions off of. That man is wealthy today because of this ruse called a carbon footprint. And you've got people even like Schwarzenegger. I remember that they were all meeting when he was governor of California still in Florida in order to discuss climate change. And he said, well, yes, I flew here in a jet, but I'm going to offset my carbon footprint. Yeah, somebody needs to give you a foot. Anyway, climate justice victories, you ask them, and what they are going to tell you, the other side, is that when they stopped the Keystone XL pipeline, that was their victory. When they stopped Arctic drilling, that's their victory. And it is by continuing these fights day in and day out, year in and year out, through the voice of a growing global movement that cannot and will not be silenced, that change will happen. This is the mindset of the United Nations. This is the mindset of those paid volunteers that I've been talking about. These are the people who attend these meetings. And they are so insistent. This is the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. This is global, folks. It's not just the US we got these nutcases. It's not just Europe. Here's Australia. End of the era of fossil fuels. You know, when they're walking around with their cell phones stuck to their ears and their laptops and their backpacks, where do they think these things come from? They pop up like mushrooms out of the earth, or does it take industry and know-how and technology? The climate justice lawsuits, this is a biggie that they are talking about. They haven't won yet, but they are after it. Because they say, well, look, if there's a typhoon in the Philippines and the Americans are over here emitting all of this carbon dioxide because of all of these industries and all of these cars and all those people breathing out, then they owe the Filipinos because they had to suffer a typhoon. This is what they're after. They want lawsuits. In social justice, they even have the church on their side. The Pope is on their side and talking about all of this. He wants social justice, environmental justice. He's totally over his head into all of this. Also, the billionaires are into it because, gee golly whiz, anybody heard of a public-private partnership? Used to be called not Marxism, fascism. That's it, fascism. Under Mussolini, it was fascism. You can own that business, but by golly, you're not doing a thing with that business that you don't get state approval for. And this is what they're into. If 28 billionaire investors led by Bill Gates, all committed to creating a public-private investment initiative on joint clean energy research and development, how does that work for the taxpayers? That means that these billionaires can put their money in and it goes down in some investment, taxpayers bail out. How good of a deal is that? They can't lose. They like those kind of investments when they can stick the taxpayers. And Obama, of course, stands with these people. Money from Gates flows to radical green groups that oppose fracking. They oppose coal. They oppose oil. And Gates refers to a public-private partnership that allows bureaucrats to pick winners and losers. He loves it. Well, just like Solyndra, solar technology, many of you may remember that name, went down and it cost taxpayers billions. John Kerry in Paris very much acted up. And I was at a restaurant one night, and some of his staff happened to be at the next table. And I was eavesdropping, which I'm quite adept at. And they were so proud of their boss. They couldn't believe how strong he was. And here's what he said. he said that those who question unscientific quote-unquote consensus of 90% of all scientists who embrace man-made climate change and their predictions of catastrophic consequences also believe the earth is flat and that there is no gravity. That's what he thinks of us. That's what John Kerry thinks of us. So we are fools just to sit here and think that we can find a middle road with these people, or that we can just hope that one day they will go away. They won't. As a matter of fact, Kerry even says that if we all biked and carpooled and used solar panels and planted 1,000 trees, guess what? It still wouldn't be enough to offset carbon pollution. So he even knows it won't work. It isn't enough. So what do they go after they destroy every interesting industry in the world, except for those that get them around and elevate their standard of living? Christiana, secretary at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and I want you to see just 3 of her radical statements to understand the tenor of what we're dealing with at these meetings. What is occurring, and this was actually in Doha where I heard her say this, in the whole climate change process is the complete transformation of the economic structure of the world. There it is. There it is. No denying it. It should happen much quicker, but it cannot happen overnight. That's what she said. Some of you may have heard of Lord Christopher Moulton, who was in the Maggie Thatcher administration. I walked out of his press conference and told him what I just heard a figure was saying. His jaw dropped. This is bold. They're not making any secret about it. She also said, I still do not understand why we don't have people on the streets every single day raising their voices for climate. Really? But isn't that what Soros and Black Lives Matter are all funding and doing right now? This means that 3/4 of the fossil fuel reserves need to stay in the ground, she says. And the fossil fuels we do use must be utilized sparingly and responsibly. So she said, yeah, well, Obama and me can have Learjets, but most of those people don't need them. That's responsible use according to the elite. So we didn't walk away with all losses from Paris. Just to go through some of our victories, the International Tribunal of Climate Justice, that's the one that would have said that if the Philippines or somewhere has a hurricane or a typhoon, and it's our fault because we emit carbon emissions, then we owe them. And so that's the tribunal that would have made sure that we were gouged for whatever payback in order to rebuild their countries. That was taken out of this document. But do you think they'll try it again next time? In Morocco this November? You betcha they will. You betcha they will. Zero emissions, they literally want zero emissions in the document. It was in there, but it was taken out. They wanted to reduce from 1.5 to 1.5 degrees. Right now in the document it's 2 degrees, and that was taken out. And they want legally obligating nations to shell out $100 billion a year. Why? Because, as I say, they haven't raised their first $100 billion, and it's been in place since 2010, when Hillary announced it in Cancun, made it happen. She announced it first in Copenhagen, and then the next year in Cancun, when it came into being. They also want to pay developing countries for weather-related loss and damages. So if it's not with a lawsuit, it's with loss and damages. How is that computed? Nobody knows. I mean, what was there before? They don't even know what they've got in most countries. Nor do they know how many people are on this globe, on this planet. It amazes me. People are such gullible beings at times. When people say, well, there are too many people on the earth and its carrying capacity, we just can't keep doing this. And it's all malarkey. How many people are dying in wars? We really don't even know. How many people are really on the earth right now? We don't really even know. The U.S. does a pretty good job of the census. You think that's being done in Bolivia? No. You get in my way, if you are Morales, they're a dictator down there, and he just does away with you. That's it. So, I think that Ted Cruz's statement here is very good. During the meeting, in Paris on December 8th as a subcommittee chairman, held a meeting called Data or Dogma, Promoting Open Inquiry in the Debate over the Magnitude of Human Impact on the Earth's Climate. That was the title of it. And in it he said, according to the satellite data, there has been no significant global warming in the past 18 years. Those are the data. The global warming alarmists don't like these data. They are inconvenient to their narrative. Very good use of a word there. But facts and evidence matter. So Ted Cruz has got it right on this issue. And the very last day, and this is my very last slide, there was something that I had not seen before. They've always had a room that they call for worship. And it is everything from Muslims going in with their prayer rugs to people going in and doing seances to having musical concerts at what were once churches. And they're not worshipful. They are not worshipful. But this man by the name of Sean Paul, I'd never heard of before, wrote a song literally worshiping the earth, a love song to the earth. It was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. Well, anyway, what we are going to have to decide as Americans, and what we're going to have to decide with all of these, is there a God on his throne? Is he worthy of worship? Or are we going to start worshiping the creation? I choose to worship the Creator. That's the difference. And with that, I'd love to hear your comments and your questions.
Ms. Cathie, you were talking about how they changed the meanings of words.
Yes.
Would you talk about the word consensus?
Yes, consensus is a word that I wish I knew by heart that Maggie Thatcher had the most perfect response for, that no one has ever been willing to fight a war for consensus. It is a meaningless word. It's whatever one person believes that they can get out of another person. Consensus has become a very common word in our day. And I think people very innocently use it in order to say, well, we've reached agreement on this. And then it's pretty vanilla at that point. But consensus in UN speak is that there is a person who heads a particular meeting, and when they are tired of hearing debate and they don't have anyone like the United States or the EU with a very strong objection, then consensus is reached and the end is declared. Consensus has been reached, is what they say. There's never a vote in the UN on these kind of things. There's a consensus instead. So you can see the perversion of the meaning of the word. I think it's innocent when most Americans use it today. But the UN does not mean anything innocent with the words that they have used. Good question. Yes.
These lawsuits on, like you were talking about, typhoons in Philippines, and we have to pay it. Is that on top of the billions we already send them when they have a typhoon?
Great point. There's not a nation on this earth, I don't believe, that ever has been as caring and has been as giving and as been Johnny on the spot. We call out to the UN to go when there's been some tsunami someplace. But who are the first ships there? Who are the first doctors there? Who are the people there with the know-how to help the people and truly do the job? It's the Americans. And that is part of a responsibility, I believe, that God has given us as a nation. But also, I think it is something that comes along with being a superpower. And those are words that I think we should be very careful about, and not prideful in a worldly way, but grateful in a spiritual way, because those are God-given gifts. And when we can share them in that way, I think it's a great thing. But to obligate us and like the peacekeepers, anyone who understands the Middle East knows that the Sinai, for example, the night before the Egyptians invaded Israel from the Sinai, the peacekeepers, the UN peacekeepers got up and left. There was no one keeping peace. You go today up on the Syrian border, which I've been to, and the Lebanese border, and the peacekeepers are just there with their cute little uniforms, you know, eating off the fat of the land. And many of them are very much abusing the local populations, the men of the women especially. Yes, sir.
I think it was the Paris climate meeting, may have been another one. I think when they were pushing all this global warming stuff, I think I heard that a group or several people just got up and walked out because this is a bunch of bull. Can you verify that?
Have people gotten up and walked out of the climate change meetings? If they get up and walk out, it's only because they're not getting enough of what they want. And it's a very temporary scene, and they make a big scene out of it, and then the Americans come back groveling and saying, okay, all right, we'll increase our, significance here and give you more money, or we'll give up more of our national sovereignty. That's what they do. There's no real getting up and walking out as Americans. We don't have enough friends in the UN to do any of that. And we aren't being successful at buying friends. And if you want to know who has the real clout at the UN today, if it wasn't for the Security Council and those 5 members, we would be absolutely the short end of every stick. We are hated because we are wealthy and because we are successful. And they don't see any of that as God's blessing. And unfortunately, our nation, for the most part, isn't seeing that either. So there isn't a respect. Who has the real clout are the Muslim nations today. And they know how to negotiate, and nobody beats them. So it's a very scary place to watch. And it's a chess game that, on a global scale, is like, oh my goodness. And I love just going and kicking them in the shins whenever I get the opportunity. It's not like we're going to walk away with big victories. We're not going to do that. We're not going to walk away and say, aha, we upset their apple cart. I don't think that's going to happen. But you can provoke thought, even with the gospel. And we always want to be ready with that. But I think that there are also opportunities, like there was one man who was extremely wealthy, one of the most wealthy men in the world, who gave this stupid workshop on how they were going to retrofit ships crossing oceans with cargo, with sails. Yeah. Anyway, after that meeting, I thought it was so hilarious. I got up and I said, that other guy that was just speaking over there, I bet he's never signed the front of a check. And he said, I can't believe you said that. They're all takers. They're not business owners. They are not people who know how to budget or they're all takers. Just, you owe me. They're negotiating for their own rights and for their own unearned gains. And we're stupid if we play into it. And unfortunately, there's a whole lot of us playing into it. Yes, ma'am.
When Donald Trump first started working for to get the nomination, he kept talking about he was going to get rid of the UN. Is there any more talk about that? I don't hear him saying that anymore.
Well, I don't know what he's planning on doing with the UN. I'd love to see him start drying up some of the pots of gold that we've got around the world. But I do think this about the UN. We have dumped enough money into it for the number of years that it's been alive, since a little over 50 years now, that you have got major resources around the globe. In Paris, France, they've got a huge UN headquarters. In Nairobi, Kenya, huge. In Belgium, huge, massive. New York City is just one of them. So if he, as President of the United States, would want to do something in New York City, I don't even see that happening. But that's a speck. It's just one little tiny, you know.
Maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe he said he was going to pull out of the union. What did he say? Does anybody remember? I know he talked about it.
Built a fence around it.
Yeah.
They were all,
Well, anyway, I do hope that during the time of Reagan, we made strides all across, you know, the landscape, even at the UN, in reducing the percentage of American monies going into the UN. And I think that that would be a really big thing if someone could do that. Getting the U.S. out of the UN and looking at the global disaster that Obama's created with the Arab Spring and seeing what's going on there. I think because none of those nations, and they're fighting to expand that Security Council right now. And they've been fighting for it for years. The Germans want a seat at the table, the Japanese want a seat at the table, and of course it was after World War II when they were the two bad guys and nobody wanted them sitting at the table. But today, they are, of course, you know, Germany has, you know, got most of the nations on its back. And the Japanese are the big power in Asia. Less than China at this point. But anyway, if they expand the seats, the number of seats of the Security Council, I think that we are in trouble. But as long as I can keep it at 5, I think that America has some clout. And we have veto power. And we can never lose that veto power. Otherwise, Israel is kicked off of the earth. Except that God is going to see better than that. But anyway, yes, sir.
Separate from the political confrontation we're talking about, have you heard of the book Dark Winter by John Casey?
Dark Winter by
Dark
John
Winter.
Casey.
He's a scientist and a climatologist, renowned in that field.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that he studied the ice cores, and he's written this book. It's very interesting and much documented in his book. He's got facts and figures.
Mm-hmm.
For the past 10,000 years of the ice cores, it's all caused by the sun's
Yes.
reaction or reaction. It's going to, he says, a 70 to a 200 year cold cycle coming,
Right.
and to be
Right.
ready for it.
Right.
It's proven fact by his studies.
Perfect. You know what? I didn't give you the other two things. I said the wind, and I got so off on the windmills because I drove past so many of them today on my way out from Dallas. But there are 3 things that determine the climate. The winds, the ocean currents, which we can't do anything about, and the sun activity. So, you know, he's right on from everything I've read as well. I'm not a scientist, obviously. But there's another author and a scientist that I highly recommend as well. Roy Spencer is his name. And he's out of the University of Alabama today. He used to be with NASA. And when Al Gore decided that we needed a satellite to circle the globe and measure the level of the seas and global temperatures and all the rest of it, Roy Spencer is the one who oversees that satellite. It's called the Terra satellite. And he has written a number of books now disproving climate change caused by human activity. Roy Spencer. So thank you for that. I mean, there's so many different things that we could talk about, like the fact that one volcanic eruption has emitted more carbon dioxide than all of the emissions burning fossil fuels throughout time. I mean, this is so nuts what we are talking about. But I can tell you this, you go to any, not just university, but you go through K through 12 as well, and the kids are all being brainwashed with this information. And so what is going to happen next? I mean, it's really a religion, as was pointed out by Ted Cruz. There has been no climate change, global warming, whatever, since 1998. Hasn't happened. Yes, ma'am.
My son is an engineer in South Carolina, and they're converting a coal plant to natural gas.
Yes.
And
good.
it costs $500 million. So you know that company is not going to, is going to get their money back. So it's going to go back to the customers.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that piece of it is advertised enough.
Right, great point. They are converting a lot of the coal power plants to natural gas. In the state of Texas, I know that when Rick Perry was governor, he would have put in like 5, get approval for like 5 coal-powered plants, and they were shut down. And it would have been a very good thing for our economy, both because we mine coal, but also because it would have been good for us producing energy. I guess we're about finished. Thank you. God bless
We
you.
got,